Normally at this point I say something like, oh, if OBS hasn't messed up, we should be live on YouTube, but this is one of the pre-recorded shows because I'll be away somewhere. And it's also a very special one because we have a very special guest that is none other than Dr. Ian Cutress. Hello. We met a couple of times at shows, but now we finally are able to have a proper conversation.
We have, we exist in the same country as well, which is, it means we can have a meeting at 9 a.m. rather than 5 p.m. whenever we're with our US counterparts.
Yep. Or, we are actually going to most likely meeting at Computex soon as well, but I think it's great to have a conversation beforehand just to discuss everything that happened after CES, but before Computex as well. And there has been quite a few releases, outside of that window. I mean, what do you kind of think of, some of the pretty big things being released and not being announced during either of the shows? I know it's something we had a very brief conversation about, especially AMD not really talking much about a brand new RX 70 series graphics cards in Las Vegas, and now they can release it afterwards. Intel also completely missed that window. Nvidia, Nvidia, they did all of the main reveals there,
Yeah.
minus the 5060 series. That's the only one they didn't mention. I mean, so like, what kind of goes into that rationale of a company, whether they announce in Computex or CS, or they just kind of have their own thing in between the two?
Well, it's when you and I started in this industry 10, 20 years ago, it's we were things were it was a much simpler time back in my day. And we've got to a point now where supply chains are more complex. We're on more advanced process node. It takes longer to produce. We also have macroeconomic conditions. If I mention the T words, that will come up. But it's not only that. We've had a period post pandemic of people understanding, what exactly is a supply chain. And not only on top of that, we've got the rise of a more diverse media portfolio, right? I started in written media, now I do a good chunk of video. We have counterparts who do one, the other, both, or some who prefer to do live at events and such. So the KPIs around, the key performance indicators around a marketing message that these companies have to provide means that sometimes the message gets lost in the noise, especially when things are happening and changing week to week. Apple has this funny way of doing things that's very different. I recall a peer telling me he, previously a journalist, went to interview at Apple and in their marketing side, of course, in their PR side. And they turned around and said, Apple speaks with one voice, not yours. And it does seem that perhaps on the more consumer side of things, when we speak about the AMDs, the Intels, the Nvidias, or even the components manufacturers, they have to deal with so many different multi-regional messages, multi-regional timelines on launching their hardware. Sometimes that message gets messed up. Or, as I said, things change on the fly. Now, am I saying that this is innocent and not nefarious? No, nefarious things can happen, and they have happened. They were worse, like I say, 10, 20 years ago. Pentium 4 benchmarking springs to mind. But it's that sort of thing. We, as more knowledgeable consumers now, having been part of this whole escapade for so long, we have a certain level of expectation of wanting to know the roadmap, wanting to know the price points, wanting to know the performance, 6, 12 months in advance before the hardware comes out. I mean, how long did we wait for the Nvidia's 50 series to come out? The latest generation, it was a good 12, 14, 16 months. And now it's all come out, bang, 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 bang. And now the conversation is, you're telling me it's out, but it's not available. So you should withhold this information from me. I'm not defending anybody here. I'm just saying the way we're approaching it now is from a much more experienced viewpoint. And from at a certain level, that's just made it more complicated. At some level, ignorance is bliss, which is how most consumers are going to take, all the latest hardware. And that applies to everybody right now.
And in terms of what we've seen so far in this GP generation, there have been some winners, there have been some losers, and it has been probably one of the most, at least from what I've seen. Obviously, you have a many more years of experience than I do, but one of the most controversial generations thus far, at least that I've seen in my life, for many reasons. Many of them kind of make you feel bad because they're somewhat out of control of the companies. Some of the supply issues, the anxiety around tariffs, some of those things they can't control too much. But is it in your kind of view as well one of these just controversial, everything going wrong generations, or has there been any in your life that you remember where things were like even worse, where even more things were going wrong, where there's this even more resentment, I say resentment, but distrust of companies like Nvidia, AMD, Intel, kind of what they're doing?
Yeah, I think part of it is just the fact that the average price of a GPU has risen so much, even in the last 5 years. Not only driven by the pandemic, but also the demand for high-end AI hardware meant that it's much more economical for Nvidia and AMD to spend wafers at TSMC building AI hardware, not consumer GPUs. Um, with the recent announcements around the 5060 Ti, especially, people are saying, "Well, hang on, you're selling me an 8 GB card for $400 now, when I could have got an 8 GB card for $200 5 years ago." I'm not sure if you remember, but the AMD RX 480, that was their flagship GPU at the time for $200, and it was labeled as a VR capable 1080 card. And the idea was you would buy two.
Yeah, I remember when there was a branding we had to deal with, like VR ready cards. That kind of went away very quickly.
I know, but it's now try and find a GPU for $200, and you're stuck, quote quote, with the Intel's Battle Mage right now. Now, don't get me wrong, Intel's Battle Mage has done really well. Nobody knows how much of their how much profit margin there is there for Intel to play in that space when the base level AMD card is 300 and whatever, the base level Nvidia card is now 300 and whatever. Nobody can find a cheap GPU anymore. Not only that, millennial and younger generations, we're now going through our third recession in our lifetime, sort of thing. And just the amount of spare money that we have at the end of the week, at the end of the month, just isn't what it used to be. It doesn't go as far as it used to, in that sense. Now, if we go back to the 90s, it's even worse, because a basic computer there would easily be 2-3 grand, and you'd find it in the back of a magazine, and it would say Gateway on it or something, and come with 32 megabytes of EDO RAM. It's gotten better since then, but it's gotten worse recently. Not only that, high demand, lack of supply, that can also be region specific as well. So I'm not saying this is the worst or most controversial generation of GPUs in all time for gamers. It is certainly a lot more complex than it used to be. So
I mean, on that point, it kind of makes me wonder what's going to be the breaking point between companies, guys like Intel, they're doing some really aggressive pricing, but others, like you said, GPUs are now costing way more than basic GPUs are costing way more than the flagship before. So it kind of makes me wonder when the breaking point is going to basically happen between people just not being able to afford it anymore because of stagnant wages and literally everything is going up, and when it's just going to be about it's just not going to become affordable for anyone. We're going to see just huge drops in every single generation when it comes to the sales of graphics cards. People just not upgrading.
well, there's one thing to look at the pre-owned market, right? Especially with the 5060 launch, 5060 Ti launch. A lot of people are now looking at what previous generation cards are now available, especially if they're upgrading from something like a 1060 or a 2080 Ti, for example. Where's the upgrade path? I mean, it's always a question, where's the upgrade path? I think one way to look at it is to put it into the perspective of how important gaming is to these companies these days. I literally put out a video last week based on a Q&A, based on a group Q&A I did with Jensen back in GTC a couple of weeks ago. And the title of the video is, essentially, Nvidia doesn't care about GPUs anymore. It was a kind of a quote unquote clickbaited title because the discussion was about whether we should still call AI chips GPUs. But it does lead to this larger question of exactly where does the gaming market, and I'm not even just talking about enthusiast gaming, I'm talking about top to tail gaming, fit in with these players? if you look at the financials, for example, Nvidia last year made over 100 billion in data center AI hardware and under 11 billion, or about 11 billion in gaming, right? So that's a 9-to-1. AI is 9 times more important to Nvidia than gaming. If you go to AMD made just over 5 billion with their latest AI chip and about 3 billion in gaming, but some of that is also console money on top of that as well. So it's more important for AMD than it is for Nvidia. So again, the question then becomes, does Nvidia care about gamers? Now you look at the features that they've pushed out recently, the AI upscaling, the frame generation, also the other additional things like background blur and eye gaze tracking, that sort of thing. They are these companies are putting out some amount of effort on the software space, and you can go see interviews with Nvidia executives like is his name Brian Cantazzo? He's in charge of the DLSS upscaling feature and frame generation. He's a really smart dude. I want to get him on my channel because I want to pick his brain about how they're going around, doing this complex mathematics on little bits of sand we taught to think. So, in a sense, the engineers care. From a corporate perspective, they're going to follow where the money and margins are. And as a result, it does mean that casual gamers are good, either have to save up or make do. I was in the background in the chat in a PC World podcast this week. And the thing kept coming up saying, well, what about a console? What about a Switch 2? I mean, the original Switch plays games at 20 FPS basically for some of them, right? And that's good enough for tens of millions of gamers. I was looking at the 5060 Ti reviews that have gone live this week, for example, this week and last week. And I'm looking at all the games being tested, and none of them are in the Steam top 50, right? So even, I mean, I can hold up my hand and say I did this when I was reviewing graphics cards and CPUs back in the day. You pick games that tax the hardware, but at some level you also have to pick games that people are playing. So even if you think the 8 GB version of the 5060 Ti is bad value compared to the 16 gig, well, is the person playing Counter-Strike? Do they need the 16 gig card for Counter-Strike if that's all they're doing? Yeah, okay, it may be a bad deal, full stop. But if that's what you get in your pre-built, that's what you get in your pre-built. I mean, I remember when I was, between the ages of 15 and 25, going from, secondary school, high school, all the way through to university, I just made do with what I could put together, regardless of cost. And even then, I still went to a LAN party with a dual-core AMD netbook and played Counter-Strike with the low poly wireframe modifications just to get 20 FPS in a shooter. But those are the hoops we all used to jump through. Yes, it does suck. It's not as price competitive as it used to be. It's not as fun and engaging, because when stuff was £200, $200, you could play a bit more, I think, and not worry about something breaking. Now, if your $500 graphics card breaks, it's a big investment to replace, that sort of thing. So, it's But then again, I'm interested in other hardware parts like AMD Strix Halo, this sort of 16 core with the onboard 20 compute unit GPU. That's almost like a console with up to 128 gigs of memory. So it's an all-in-one SoC. Now the 32 gig version is about 1,000. The 128 gig version is 2,000. Yeah, that's obviously another step up, but that's a whole system in a chip almost. So there's stuff happening that's interesting, but unfortunately it's the GPU market that's not.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the mobile space right now, some really exciting things are happening when it comes to some of these offerings from guys like AMD and Intel as well. Though I believe that some of their things have been delayed. What's the latest one called? That was delayed. Panther Lake, I believe.
Yeah. So Panther Lake is Intel's first consumer product on their newest 18A process node that should be coming at the back end of the second half of the year. What's delayed there is the enterprise CPU has been pushed into Q1 next year.
Yeah, but still, I gotta say, if people don't really care about graphics cards anymore, but they feel that they're just outpriced them and they don't feel there's enough going on, just look at what's going on in the mobile space. Just the amount of power you can get now and some of the really awesome stuff that's going on there. Look there. Now, one thing I wanted to also touch on, talking about how much gaming and graphics cards matter to players. You talked about how much it matters, or maybe doesn't matter, to guys like Nvidia and AMD. But then it's Intel. Intel's in a bit of a different boat because of how they've been struggling a bit in past years, like switching out CEOs. A brand new one just came onto the main to man the ship. And now the question is, how much would gaming matter to a company like Intel, who are struggling to get back the ground in other sectors that guys like AMD have been stealing in the past couple of years? So do you see the success of gaming products like Battle Mage and generally Intel Arc to be what Intel needs right now, or do you think it's also this kind of very secondary priority like for the others?
So you have to kind of go back to how Intel discrete graphics started. The whole idea was Intel as a company said, we already ship 100 million GPUs a year. They're mobile GPUs, right? They're integrated onto the chip with our dual core Pentiums and Celerons back in the day. What if we just scale this up to something that's around 150 watts? Surely that's easy, right? Turns out it's not, and it takes 5 years. And unfortunately, they launched like after 3 years, and the software took another 2 years to catch up. And even then, there's still like some DirectX 9, 10, 11 stuff still to figure out. And also, some performance stuff on lower end CPUs still to work out. But with the latest generation Battle Mage, the B580, it was positioned as a mid-range GPU. It was priced aggressively. It sold really well. A lot of people were really enthused that this is a great attack of a decent enough card that matches the performance we need at that price point. Okay, it's still a bit power hungry compared to the competition if you were to scale it up. But at some point, desktop gamers don't care about power consumption. They just care about price. And with that, there has been this constant rumor that Intel's going to ditch Arc as a whole GPU brand. Now, I've never seen any credence to any of these rumors. Every time I speak to Intel, it's always gung ho, especially because that architecture, along with their AI architecture, is essentially part of their AI portfolio, right? It's something that they want to hang their hat on and say, this is how we're providing AI in the future. That being said, you brought up the new CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, who came in. He is a guy with a background. He used to run a company called Cadence, which develops software for chip design. So when a company builds a chip, they have to have designs a chip. They have to have software to go design the chip. And there's like 2 or 3 main companies, and this guy was actually the CEO for one for like 14 years. He's also an investor. He's invested in over 250 companies. And normally when you're an investor, if 1 out of 10 of your investments succeed, they IPO or they get acquired, that's great. His success rate is 25%. So it's a lot better success rate than the others. So he's seen as a very business-focused guy who understands the market. And 2 weeks after he got the top job, he stood on stage at their Intel Vision event, and it was streamed online. And he turned around and said, look, we need to make sure that Intel is focused on its core businesses, right? Given the situation they're in with the build out of their fabs and their money and their competitiveness, this was essentially a call to action to say, while we may have slashed before, we may slash a bit deeper now. So what are Intel's core businesses? Well, right now, client CPUs are making the most money. That's the biggest business unit. After that, it's the enterprise CPUs. And then you have to think, well, what else do we know Intel for? Okay, manufacturing foundry, let's keep that. So what's number 4? Is it networking? Intel's big in networking. Is it desktop graphics cards? Is it AI? Their AI accelerator is called Gaudi. Is actually done pretty badly over the last 3, 4, 5 years. When people say Intel missed the smartphone a decade ago, it looks like they may miss AI again this time round. So realistically, I'd perhaps put GPUs as like Intel's fourth or fifth most important business unit right now. For me, that's still going to be one that they're going to focus on, especially as it's part of the roadmap going forward. Now, we may see Intel cut other stuff around it. Does Intel really need a quantum computing research division? Does it really need a neuromorphic research division? Did you know that Intel's actually manufactured cryptocurrency chips for people as a contract manufacturer in the past? It's that sort of thing. Should Intel still be doing that? That's what a lot of people think is going to get rid of. And GPUs isn't, desktop GPUs especially, isn't on the chopping block. Now, does that mean that they're going to keep the focus of the desktop GPU on gamers? I believe the people inside the company, inside that division, really want to. I mean, they hired a guy called Tom Peterson, right, who spent 15 years at Nvidia being the GeForce evangelist, right? He was the one that Nvidia put always in front of people like you and me to speak about the deep dive architecture for the latest Nvidia hardware. He's now working for Intel and has been for like the last 2 years. He's like one of the very few people at Intel that have a custom email address as well that isn't following the company norms. And they're all, gung-ho about it. They've loved the reception that Battlemage has had for the products they put into the market. Now, you can say right product, right price, right time. That does a really good job if you can nail all three. We know that next generation is called Celestial. We know after that is Druid. I really like their naming scheme for what it's worth. For as much as Intel gets crapped on for its naming schemes, the GPU naming scheme is actually pretty good. They got a good team to name that. I think a question is more aligned of, do we see Intel pushing more into the high end, competing with a 70 class, competing with an 80 class, competing with a 90 class GPU? And I'd really love to see them get there, to reach performance parity, because then we can have a good three-way competition. And I think that if we want to bring about innovation in consumer GPUs or price competitiveness, we need that to happen.
Seeing them, I think it's going to take probably 1 or 2 more generations, but I do very much imagine that it can get to that kind of 70, 80, maybe even 90 tier. And even if, like we talked about them being kind of expensive, not many people buying them, it's not just about that, it's also about the kind of marketing it provides, being able to see that your company's graphics cards are the ones topping performance charts at the high end. Kind of gives people, I'd say, confidence in buying the lower end products as well. It shows that, they can kind of trust that company when it comes to providing you with the best performance. That's like gross oversimplification, but I'm kind of just going over the way kind of, I'd say, a average consumer would probably look at it, especially if maybe they don't have a full understanding of, some of the differences between some flagship or mid-range or like lower end products. But yeah,
it's the halo effect.
Yeah, basically.
The halo effect is great.
So, here's hoping that Intel will get there, hopefully sometime soon, because we need some competition. And I'm honestly, by that point, it'll be the point where I'll be upgrading probably my graphics card, my 4080. So, being able to have like an Intel flagship in there, that would be pretty sweet. Though, oh man, another thing is just kind of the software and me getting very used to Nvidia's software, Nvidia's ways of doing things when it comes to the software, some of the features, and that's going to be very difficult because now, especially given the market share, game developers, any kind of tool developers, they are prioritizing all of those Nvidia software features as well. That's going to make transitioning over to anything else kind of a bit more difficult, I'd say, for me. But performance is king, and if they can offer the right performance at the right price, I think I'd do a switch there. I don't know, like, what do you think about the kind of competitiveness of the ecosystems there when it comes to software, and how much it is going to impact what you put in your like PC at home?
Well, it's companies like Nvidia and AMD for years have gone to game developers and said, here's a bucket of money, optimize for us, right? The Nvidia, the way it's meant to be played, that sort of scheme where Nvidia will go and use its own employees to help a game developer accelerate their engine, accelerate their performance, just provide a better experience for people who buy those cards. And it's one of those positive feedback loops. The better a company performs selling GPUs means the more money they can put towards having those engagements with software developers. That's never going away. And it's one of those things that if you come in at the base level, and one of the reasons why we've had no new GPU entrants except for Intel over the last decade, is because you have to be able to weather the financial storm of not having those relationships or building up. I mean, if you go to a studio, a mid-sized studio with 50 developers, if Nvidia is giving them X 100,000 US to use their Nvidia proprietary libraries, if you're not going to offer anything, why would they bother listening to you, right? It's that sort of engagement, and I'm not saying that every developer is like that. Obviously, something like a GTA game, every generation works with everyone because they just know how widespread. AMD has the foot in because they are the console IP providers. They make all the console chips. Nvidia supplies the Tegra processors for the Switch, so there's an in there. What does Intel have? Well, Intel's argument is we have 100 million mobile chips in the market, so work with us. As an end user, personally, I have Nvidia in my system. I actually have a 4090, but I put the 2080 Ti in because the 4090 kept blue screening, and I just haven't had time to figure out why. And now it's really annoying because I'm doing a lot of video editing, in AV1 and stuff. Right now, and I'm the sort of person who updates my graphics drivers once a year, right? I don't play lean edge games. The games I play are called Trackmania, which came out in 2020. And even then, my 2080 Ti does chug a bit sometimes, but it doesn't have any of the latest features. And so at some level, you have to think, well, what games does a person play and how much do they want to micromanage every little feature of the software that's provided with that piece of hardware? I mean, how often do you play around with if your CPU cooler has a little OLED screen? Well, there's a software package for that. Your webcam, well, there's a software package for that. My teleprompter, well, there's a software and now it turns out I've run out of memory on my system because of all these software packages for the hardware I need to support. Heck, I'm pretty sure even key lights these days probably have software integration, or it all comes through your mobile phone or what have you. The point of having all those features there is because there's always that niche of a niche of a niche of enthusiasts who will always want to use it, who will always want to pick it apart, and so it gets the absurd amount of time focused on it. The benefit of obviously having an Nvidia card now is if you want to play with AI, you want to do any AI development, it's going to be the easiest one to pick up and run, right? AMD is trying to get there, Intel's trying to get there. So if you're a software developer that wants to do GPU programming, either in high performance or in AI, you can buy the cheapest Nvidia card on the market today, and the software you write will run on the biggest Nvidia supercomputer that exists in the world today. They've built the ecosystem end to end, and that's a very they call it the CUDA moat, for example. That's a very large moat to cross if that's what you want to do. But then I come back to that's still the tip of the tip of the tip. Most people are going to be playing Counter-Strike. They are going to be playing League of Legends. They are going to be playing Dota. They are Fortnite, or whatever the kids are playing these days. Yeah, or Call of Duty, and some of those are console optimized first, right? So well, one of the things I did see in like the 5060 Ti 8 gig versus 16 gig comparisons from our peers out on the web is a lot of them were looking to exacerbate the difference between the 8 gig and the 16 gig by running top tier AAA games or AA games that were always at the VRAM limit.
Yeah, that's not the way I would do it personally if I was benchmarking them, because that's not a use case many people would probably do when picking one of these up. I think it's great to know that information if you try to pick that one of those up, but I think that's on the
Yeah.
way. I'd do it. I'd review one of those.
Yeah, it's and the thing is this industry does go in circles, right? There used to be a time where you could pick up like a GT70 class card, and it would either come in 1 GB, 2 GB, or 4 GB of memory. So and there was no confusion to which one you wanted or needed because it said it on the box. And for some reason, it's now an issue because it's trying to be obfuscated. I mean, nobody sampled the 1 GB back in the day. They all sampled the 2 because the 4 was a special edition from MSI because they decided to break the rules. Because back in the day, you used to be able to break the video card vendors' rules because there wasn't this such blowback of if you don't follow the rules, we won't give you the hardware to sell. Yeah, like I say, going back to the first part of this conversation, supply chain has got more complex. There's a lot more. They call it MDF, not medium density fiber board, as I keep thinking, but marketing discretionary funds. This is like the co-marketing budget. So if you market the way we tell you to, we'll help by giving you some money to do some co-marketing. And Nvidia, AMD, Intel all play with all their vendors on this, whether it's CPUs, GPUs, enterprise servers. It's part of playing the game in order to try and, like an OEM, for example, maximizing your margins, because the margins on GPUs these days are wafer thin. Nvidia basically says, here's a list of providers you should buy all the parts from. If you don't buy from this list, we'll knock you down in MDF, that sort of thing. So you're being able to be unique amongst your competitors can be difficult.
Yeah, in a way, I do feel bad for all of those third-party partners that Nvidia has because they don't give them too much, like you said, freedom in that way. And also, if they don't do things exactly how Nvidia wants them to do, then they obviously they won't make near as much money with guys like AMD or Intel if they kind of switched over or shifted the priority over. Plus, we know that Nvidia have also been going after partners to not produce Intel graphics cards. That also kind of goes back to the point where we said how we haven't seen too many new players enter the scene apart from Intel. That makes me kind of wonder: have you looked at all into that whole board graphics card? If that's something you kind of investigated much and
Yeah, I actually first spoke with Bolt over 2 years ago when they were still in stealth. So I've known what they've been planning a long time. The Bolt graphics, it has been presented a bit weirdly. So I just want to set the scene. This is a hardware startup with funding that's going to be producing a graphics accelerator for the market sometime, and initial test samples are coming, I think they said mid 26, right? So that's for partners to play with the hardware. Essentially, there's going to be some emulation and simulation tools before then, but I'm not calling it a GPU just yet. I'm calling it a graphics accelerator because what they've designed is effectively a custom piece of silicon that is 110% optimized for path tracing. So this is ray tracing on steroids. This is where every pixel in your scene is accurately rendered by ray tracing, and it's a performance nightmare because you have to think, well, how many bounces does this ray do on the scene before it hits the camera, and how much transparency is, but so it's like reflecting a light off a glass, off a light, off a glass, off a light, off a glass. And the better you do that, essentially the idea is the more photorealistic it can be. And this is really hard for modern GPUs to do. However, back in, I think, 2013, I saw a company called Imagination Technologies, who used to be the providers of Apple's graphics IP, for example. They came out with a 5-watt chip that did 300 million rays per second. So on a 1080p scene, that was essentially 150 bounces, 150 rays per pixel. per second. So 30 frames a second. That's 5 bounces. It was, but this was in the early to mid 2010s. So we're 10 years on from that, easy, right? So we can do a lot better today. And what Bolt has done is said, this is hardware that's going to essentially amplify full path tracing scenes, allowing especially the video effects industry, the animation industry, get to photorealism quicker. One of the things in, say, building an animated film with tools like Blender is that you need to be able to render the scene quick so you can see if something's wrong, make a change, and then do it again. Fail fast, fail often, that sort of thing. If you're trying to do that with a render farm, which is what Pixar uses, you may be waiting 2 days to see a frame, right? And the idea is that with their installation, you can do it in 15 minutes, right? That's the kind of speed up they're trying to go for here. So visual effects artists, you can also imagine people who work a lot with, say, architecture and engineering software that have to do, the deep cutaways of bridges and ships. The ones that look overly technical and you actually really need to get your hands in if you want to understand anything, that sort of thing. So what does it mean for gaming? Well, as far as I understand it, the original idea for this card was going to be more like I'm not sure if you remember back in the day, the PhysX card. So PCI card you add in that did secondary non-interactive physics, but it was a dedicated piece of silicon, or in this case an FPGA, and that's all it did. And the bandwidth was such you could offload the compute. Now eventually the GPUs got so fast, PhysX became a software package you just implemented on the GPU. Path tracing isn't that. I mean, we would have ray tracing, but like I say, it's ray tracing on steroids. If you take away all the raster stuff on silicon and replace it with ray tracing, you can get there. And this is what these guys have kind of done. The idea is that over time, they will introduce the front end and back ends to properly enable things like Vulkan support. And then maybe at some point, DirectX support. And then you get to things like, well, how about a window driver stack? Then you get to talk about, speak to game engine software vendors, Unreal, Unity. And so that's a path to getting to a gaming GPU that only does path tracing, which sounds insane to today, but give it 5 years, who knows where it's going to be. Now, of course, in order to be competitive, you might need to be on a leading edge process node, and that's expensive. We speak about TSMC, 5 nanometer, 4 nanometer, 3 nanometer. I already mentioned Intel's 18A, for example. Does this need high bandwidth memory? There's a complex supply chain around that because Nvidia keeps buying it all and leaving none for anybody else. It's that sort of thing. So you're saying we don't have many GPU entrants, and I said Intel's a new one, but we still haven't had many. You could consider Qualcomm has mobile graphics. Why can't they do a discrete graphics version? It's been something I've actually been speaking to them for years about, and I keep pushing them to do it. So we'll see.
Receptive of that? Like, have they been seriously thinking about it, or they were just like, yeah, maybe one day?
I think they want to get their graphics to work perfectly in the notebook space first with their Snapdragon X Elite. Because they've now got a range of Windows-based laptops running ARM with their own GPU. So developing their own DirectX and Vulkan drivers and making sure they work across games, and work with an ARM CPU, not an x86 CPU. That's been half the battle. So I think they want that to be almost complete before they're looking at scaling up any potential silicon. And even if they did, because they want to go after the notebook market, it might be a chip inside a notebook first rather than a PCIe card. But never say never. It depends on how successful, again, that product line goes and how many years they're willing to take quote unquote losses on developing the new silicon to do that. Same with Intel and GPUs, right? I do wonder at some level if Intel is actually net positive on their GPU business yet, or when.
I'd highly doubt they are yet, but I think given the success so far and the kind of demand for Battle Mage series, it won't be long. I'd say. I think they're on the right path there.
Yeah. But going back to Bolt, yeah, don't expect them to be a GPU contender anytime soon. I'm pretty sure their main market right now is going to be video effects, Blender. They may integrate into some of the game engines early, but only the game engines that are, again, focused more towards the architecture, towards the engineering, nuclear reactor design, or digital twin, right? The whole concept Nvidia has of can we recreate a factory in a virtual world in order to predict how efficient it can be before we even build it. And turns out if you have that, if you want it more graphically accurate, you need it path traced, not ray traced, that sort of thing. So that's where they see the market is going. I might actually be filming a video on it later today because I have some studio time booked this evening.
I'm just happy that there are some things to look forward to, because I feel like a lot of this episode was kind of doom and gloom about where the industry is right now. But I'm happy there is some stuff that people can look forward to at least. So that's good at least. But speaking of things to look forward to, I think the last thing we should probably end on here is what are some of the things we can expect then at the big show in Taipei then?
Yeah, it's going to be weird this year, and I've heard other people in our position say it, because last year at Computex we saw the launch of AI PC, right? Qualcomm, Intel, AMD all had their big announcements about what AI PC is going to be. Notebooks with NPUs that can do Microsoft Copilot. And for as big a fanfare as it was, and part of my role these days in the industry is actually as a technical marketing consultant. So I actually worked with all three companies on their launches last year. So it was pretty big. Whether you believe it was worth it or not, we'll leave that for people to talk about in the comments. But this year, by contrast, doesn't seem that big of a wow factor. And I'll put it in this context. Last year, we had keynotes from Nvidia, AMD, Intel, ARM. It was even the first time that an Intel CEO had keynoted at Computex ever. In the past, it had been like the person in charge of Intel Asia or in charge of Intel client computing. So it was the first time an Intel CEO. But this year, the only companies that have keynotes are Nvidia, because Jensen's got to be there. He's even not even having the keynote in the normal place. He's having it in a stadium because that's what he does these days.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing happened in CES. They had to book that entire arena, I remember, and the queues went on for ages. So I don't blame them for booking probably just one of the biggest places they can in Taipei.
Yeah, same happened at GTC. 13,000 people at the SAP arena in San Jose. The other keynotes are coming from MediaTek. MediaTek CEO is going to be keynoting. ARM is going to have their own press conference, and that's about it. Right now, if you look at the whole consumer-wide industry, we have just come off the back of a good 2-3 quarters of launches, right? CPUs, GPUs from every company. And for anybody who's been reviewing this stuff as a journalist, as an influencer, as a YouTuber, it's almost been non-stop, just all the launches that have gone on since November last year. It's been pretty thick, which means that we're actually going to go into a relative quiet period where we're not going to have many launches. You mentioned Panther Lake. That's going to be on my radar coming towards the end of the year. Are we going to see 50 series GPUs, the sort of, again, lower down parts from AMD Nvidia? We don't know yet. Nvidia's keynote last year at Computex actually was mostly enterprise and went on for 2 hours. And when Jensen was asked, why didn't you speak about gaming? He said, it was already 2 hours. We didn't want to bore you. To which my response would have been, you're at Computex. It's a consumer show. speak about consumer stuff, please. So the general consensus is that Computex is almost going to be um, I'm not going to say vacation, but a chance for the industry to decompress after so many consistent high impact, launches, if you want to call them high impact, with all the controversy that they've given. So it's also a spot where the media in the industry get a chance to get together and actually converse face to face. For example, us based in Europe, it means it's the only time of the year really we see the Australians, because the Australians don't usually come to CES because it's a bit of a faff to get over there. So we get to meet. We also get to speak to all the Taiwanese companies that we don't see at other events because they only do the Taiwanese trade shows. So I mean, at CES you will get the Asus, you'll get the Gigabyte, you get the MSI, but you won't get an ASRock, you won't get a G Skill, you won't get a Geil. You will get a Corsair, but you won't get a Lian Li, for example. So Computex is a chance for a lot of those other companies now. Given the fact that we don't expect there to be any super high powered launches, they get to show their generational improvements. The only annoying thing is there's going to be a lot of Americans there who are going to want to ask about tariffs. So for people like you and me based here, it shouldn't really affect us, but I bet you it will, because everybody's going to want to talk about it, and everybody's going to and they may even change midweek for all we know, given what's going on. 345%, 445%, whatever. Or maybe there's now a new bypass. It might also mean that it's an opportunity for other stories to shine through, some of the more industry trends that have been bubbling under the surface. Normally, Gigabyte does something like a headquarters tour. Asus does a tour of their fab, so we may see some more coverage around that. I remember last year, for example, ASRock showed a motherboard where the back panel was all Thunderbolt ports. I'm not sure if you remember. So I know the guy who designed that. He is crazy as hell. I mean, literally, this is a guy who doesn't need a stimulant to start jumping from wall to wall in the morning. Red, we love you, but you're insane, mate. But keep doing it, please. It's that sort of insane innovation that we like to see. One thing we saw last year, as I'm sure I remember, is the creation of CAM and LPCAM2 modules. This sort of new memory form factor designed to help with signaling and also help with just the visual aesthetics and cooling of a motherboard. A couple of weeks ago at GTC, we actually saw another technology in the same vein called SOCAM. And this is LPDDR on a lay flat module. So right now it's being designed for Nvidia's AI hardware for serviceability reasons, but Samsung, Micron, and SK Hynix are all in on this. So they're the memory vendors. JEDEC, the standards body, is part of this. What in our industry uses lots of LPDDR? Mini PCs. And we've been complaining for ages that mini PCs don't have different memory configurations because the LPDDR is soldered onto the motherboard. If you buy a box with like a Ryzen 3 or Ryzen 5 mobile chip in it, you're fixed with that amount of memory. Or you have to go buy expensive SODIMM modules, and that just breaks the aesthetic or it changes cooling. Now with replaceable SOCAM modules, that maybe opens up a new avenue in mini PC land for customization and skewing. So again, coming back to the fact that we're not going to have, we don't think, many headline topics in Computex this time around, it does mean we're going to might see stories like that shine through. Whether that is actually one, I would love it for it to be one. But I'm sure you just as well as I, we're going here to see what can we see, what are they going to tell us, what can we ask questions about, and see some of these trends.
One thing I'm curious about, because several companies told me this at CES, they had a very difficult time even getting booth space because of AI startups taking a lot of it. So
the Taiwanese AI startup space is very complex and busy. So part of my day job as this sort of consultant and analyst that I am is that I track AI hardware startups, around about 150 of them, and I'd say a good 40% are like Taiwanese local. And some of which do go to CES and they make a big song and dance about CES. Most of them do. It's most of them don't tackle things like ChatGPT, large language models. Most of them take on vision, so things like security cameras and IoT, and that's where a lot of them play. The thing is, startups tend to have a investment money, and Computex does give preferential treatment to local businesses. That's not going to stop Lenovo having a massive booth, right? But maybe it does mean that instead of a booth that's 10 feet by 20 feet, they end up with a 10 feet by 10 feet one, right? It might be that sort of thing. Computex in recent years has evolved from one main building to two buildings, rather than it being one building here and another building halfway across the city. Now it sounds, if that's going to be the case, maybe they have to reopen the one across the city in order to get it to work. We'll see. Things post-pandemic at Computex have changed a little bit. So I am wondering if that will, quote unquote, go back to normal, or if we're going to see a bit more of an evolution. I mean, this is all pretty much inside baseball at this point. But once you've been in the industry as long as we have, it's the sort of thing that actually you start to care about.
Yeah, I mean, it's only going to be my second Computex, but I can already starting to feel myself really look forward to it and care about this show prospering in a way. Especially, I very much preferred its approach to a lot of things rather than CES. It could just also be the fact that you didn't have to travel across the city just to get anywhere, which is one of the worst parts. Going between the Las Vegas Convention Center and the Venetian Convention Center, that was like 15 minutes by bus, even though on Google Maps they're like right next to each other. Just the idea of across the road means something completely different in Vegas. But I'd say I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Computex would be like this year. You talked about it kind of being a bit different pre-pandemic. Like I said, I haven't been before, so what exactly changed?
So the first Computex post-pandemic was the country was still in lockdown essentially, so nobody could fly in, so it was a full internal one. The year after, so that I think would have been 22. In 23, it started to open up, but wasn't that well attended. So the way to think about it is, in previous years you'd have Tynex, which is the Nongong Exhibition Center. Essentially, that's where the main set of companies are, and that used to be one building. You'd then have the Grand Hyatt across town near the 101, which these two floors would be filled with companies that you could go see or have meetings for. And then you'd also have the building next to the Hyatt also be an area that was populated, but that was more IoT and the deeper component level, like capacitors and stuff. That's where they would go. Now, pretty much everyone from the Hyatt and the building next to the Hyatt has moved into the Nongong Exhibition Center, because the Nongong Exhibition Center is now two buildings. But that doesn't stop some companies still being in the Hyatt. And the infrastructure has improved. I mean, Taiwan has an amazing metro system anyway. It's nice and cheap, and you can get full 5G signal pretty much anywhere in the network. Unlike London, where if I go 2 stops down the line, I lose everything, even though the mayor says he's fixed it and he hasn't. So the post-pandemic, there was also because Taiwan went into lockdown early, there was this need to keep people further apart. Computex still has the perennial booth babe issue. Unfortunately, it's cultural. So it means that sometimes you get stuck behind 50 photographers who just happen to go see their favorite booth babe actress and want to take pictures of her. That's unfortunate, but that still exists. And yeah, so the fact that in 2024 we had these big launches, we now have people like Nvidia having their own space in the hotel next to the convention center as well. That might still be a thing this year. I'm speaking with them about that. What I'm the because this is only your second Computex. Did you actually do any tourist things last time?
Yeah, so I went a few days before that, and also in the tiny amount of time I had between editing stuff, I did actually do some stuff. I went to the Taipei 101, I went to some of the night markets, but that's about it. I didn't visit any of the big kind of sites like the memorial,
Yeah.
the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial, for example. I didn't really do any of that or wander too much into like new Taipei, basically that whole region.
Yeah. There's two things I always do when I go to Taipei, and I think this will be something like my 15th Computex. One is I try and go up north to Beito for a hot spring. One of the advantages of being a volcanic island means that they have very strong, nutritious, sulfurous water. And you pay something like $60 and you get an hour and a half in a private onsen, essentially. And it's really nice, sulfurous water that really. I'm getting older, so all my skin is cracking, especially after, a 15-hour flight there in the very dry air. And so that's really nice. I usually spend at least some time to go up there and get a private onsen. In the south of the city, I always take the gondola up into the mountains, and that's where I buy my green tea for the year. I visited the same old lady every trip I've been, and I think I've been pretty much every trip I've gone to Taipei. I've gone up into the mountains. There's a crossroads once you get into the gondola at the top. I turn left, walk for about 10 minutes, and there's this really small shop on the right with a cute little cat logo. And I always buy my green tea from the old lady there, who must be easily in her late 80s by now. Unfortunately, I've run out. So the minute I land, I think I need to, essentially drop my bags off at the hotel and go straight up the mountain to go get my tea. The 1 year I didn't, 1 or 2 years I didn't go is because Taipei gets typhoons. So they do close the gondola if it's been that sort of time. Last year would have been good because they had just had a typhoon, so it was about 10 degrees cooler the whole week that during Computex than so what I always recommend people bring is either a handheld fan or one of those neck fans that you can get from Amazon for about $20. Even if you're a tourist visiting, if you're not used to the temperature, if you're not used to the humidity, and it really affects you like it affects me, that is a vital purchase all the time. Have you met Wendell from Level 1 Techs?
I have. I met him at Computex last year. I met him at LTX. Yeah, we spoke a few times.
So I first met him physically in person at the top of the mountain. We arranged to meet, and he beat me there by like 5 minutes. But that's where we first met in person, I think, in like 2018. So there's a picture of us where we're drenched in sweat, and yeah, we went to get tea, and the restaurants up there all have green tea flavored food. So getting a green tea flavored pork steak and green tea rice was interesting.
I need to really start noting all of those place recommendations for me there. I also definitely need a list of restaurant recommendations, but we'll do that after the show. But in short, there's, I think, stuff to look forward to come in Computex, even though guys like AMD or Intel won't even have keynotes. I think it will still be a very interesting show, especially if hopefully given how much time we've had with this current AI craze, hopefully people are now starting to come up with really creative ways to utilize the tech rather than just using AI as a buzzword, which has been happening for quite a while now. So I'm here. That's one of my hopes for the show this year. But either way, it was great talking to you, and see you at Computex.
See you there, and see anybody else who's going.
And for all of you watching, thank you so much for tuning into this conversation with Dr. Ian Cutress. I want to know, are you one of those people who really kind of cares about always having the doctor at the front of your name? Because I know there's preferences. With people who have the title.
So I did it as a joke the first time I met Linus. I put because I knew who he was and he knew who I was. But at that time, he was somebody who read what I did, and so I kind of laid it on thick. And so now he takes the Mickey out of me every time by putting it in front of my name. And when people ask, I just say, "Do whatever you want. I don't care." Right. And now people get this assumption that I'm one of these anal people who demands it every time. And whenever my name goes up on Reddit, there's always a few people saying, "Oh, he's one of those idiots who puts doctor in front of his name. We work in industry where there's loads of doctors." I'm like, no, that's just the personal preference of. And yeah, it's I did it to Linus because I like to dick him around sometimes because it's fun, because it's Linus. And but yeah, no, that one kind of backfired. But no, I don't mind. I don't mind.
Well, anyways, so hopefully you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Ian Cutress. If you did, then remember to subscribe, like, whatever, and I'll see you all in whatever I make next. So goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.
Yep.